the world's second strongest army, unparalleled, and Kyiv in 3 days. All of this is about them, the Russian Federation's military, with just one caveat. This is how they were portrayed a year and a half ago, before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. However, from the very first hours of Putin's monstrous adventure, the Ukrainian armed forces showed who really controls the situation here. The myth of the invincibility of the Russian army is melting before our eyes. As long as Russian soldiers weren't dying en masse in Ukraine, it was easy to maintain the legend. Every year, 100 or 2 elite troops were filmed from different angles on brand new equipment with claims that the entire Russian army was just like that. However, after losing their most advanced EU units, the reserves that replaced them, both in terms of personnel and equipment, turned out to be much worse.
Fucked up! What is it? Another one just like it, damn it! Second army in the world, for fuck's sake!
Let's start with the most basic thing, the soldiers' military gear and equipment. The first units of the Rashists who broke through to Kyiv last spring could still boast decent equipment, such as uniforms and protective gear. But those whom Mother Russia sent after them are now being outfitted any which way.
Volunteers arrived yesterday. They sent this as aid. A hole. Some of it is in fact scorched. Fuck.
But it would be one thing if it were just the clothes full of holes. This is the attitude Russian supply units have towards everything.
Look at what they're fighting in. It's just absolutely ridiculous. Damn it. Just look at this. This is how the world's second army fights.
Armor plates, even when they are stacked one on top of the other, still can't withstand even a simple pistol shot. On the other hand, you might as well not issue plates at all, since the Russians saw that compartment in the plate carrier not as a place for armor, but rather as an extra stash for loot.
Guys, this is honestly just wild. I wanted to take a plate out of a Russian bulletproof vest. So I pull out the plate, shake it out. I'm thinking, wow, it looks kind of fancy, double layered or something. I turn it over, and it's not armor at all. Yet some idiot took out the armor plate and stuffed a MacBook in there instead. That's the kind of guys they are.
You might think this is a unique case of Russian stupidity and carelessness, but no.
I open up another bulletproof vest, and there's a MacBook and an iPad in there too. Only this time, a bullet hit it. That's how these conquerors go about conquering.
Helmets in the Russian army are also often made according to the principle of as long as it looks good in pictures. However, pieces of steel covered in modern camouflage look good at parades, but are useless in actual combat.
Russian army might looks like a helmet. Tactical military, right? Look, everything as it should be. Hot. It's a tin can. From 2015, for fuck's sake, the second army in the world. Damn it.
The occupiers' personal weapons also deserve special attention. Russians' love for the Tsarist era is well known, but this is taking it too far. Arming soldiers with firearms from the century before last. Soon after, hapless snipers equipped with Mosin rifles from the year 1891 started appearing at the front lines. The weapon really is legendary, but fighting with 3-line rifles from the Russian Imperial Army is just too much. To be fair, it should be noted that this is more of an exception. But the symbol of reliability, the Kalashnikov assault rifle, is the main small arms weapon for Russians. However, after being stored in warehouses, its condition is even worse than that of the Mosin rifle.
Look, we're getting these rifles. I'm just, honestly...
They just gave this crap to the tank guys.
They told you don't have a tank.
Why the hell do you need Kalashnikovs? If you don't have a tank, you're suffering badly.
As for the equipment, the main pride of Russia, the newest Armata and T-90 tanks, BTR-90s, Mi-35 helicopters, Su and MiG aircraft. This is exactly what the West has feared for decades. This is why some politicians wanted to let Putin save face.
Today, the Russian army is one of the strongest in the world. Its strength lies in professional soldiers who have an excellent level of specialized training and the latest types of strategic weaponry.
However, in reality, it turned out that Russia doesn't actually have that much modern weaponry. The most advanced units with all the newest and most modern equipment were either destroyed or captured by the defense forces through superhuman efforts in the first 6 months of the full-scale war. Now, on the front lines, Russia is already fighting with museum pieces.
They're now taking Soviet-era equipment out of storage. They're pulling out BTR-70s, taking D-30s out, and using the ZIL-131 as the main tractor for the D-30.
And there are no more Kamaz, there aren't enough anymore. That's it. They're gone. So tanks of even older modifications will be taken out of storage too.
Given that this equipment is old, they've started to upgrade it with improvised means right on the battlefield. Confronted with modern anti-tank weapons, which mostly strike from above, the best idea Russian soldiers could come up with was to weld grates over the tank turrets. These have popularly become known as barbecues. Military engineers at the factories are also showing their own creativity. For them, welding naval guns onto old MTLBs has already become standard practice. Meanwhile, Russian inventors have carefully mounted a remotely controlled combat module intended for fighting drones on the BTR-82 chassis. However, there are more questions than answers here. The system installed on the turret without any protection will become the first target for UAVs. Moreover, its placement has created a large blind spot. In other words, not only are the vehicle's eyes unprotected, they're practically half covered. But the main resource of the Russian army still isn't these modern solutions, but rather Soviet stockpiles. The trains loaded with equipment increasingly resemble the days of World War II. After all, there are fewer and fewer modern T-90s, or even their predecessors, the T-72s, left.
These are T-55s, T-54s vehicles that have been kept in strategic storage for decades, up to 50 years or even more. This is equipment from the 1950s and 1960s. The fact that the crews inside are basically suicide squads doesn't really bother the Russians. Basically, this is equipment that can drive and shoot, so they'll pull out anything they possibly can.
So of all the equipment listed on the Russian General Staff's paperwork, what actually drives and shoots? When they rushed to check, several Russian generals simply shot themselves rather than explain why the warehouses of the world's second army look like this.
They've already managed to film something here. The amount of equipment is just terrible, terrible. There's just so much of it. Well, here we are down below. We're looking very closely. Someone's already pulled out the engine. It was here a week ago and it wasn't.
Every month, the Russians lose several times more equipment at the front than they are able to produce. And as a result, the Russian forces are irreversibly losing their combat potential.
Currently, there are 400,000 Russian Federation military personnel operating in Ukraine. They have about 300 airplanes, 300 helicopters, 2,000 tanks, and 4,000 armored fighting vehicles. So what the Admiral mentioned basically shows that roughly the same number of tanks have been destroyed over the past year and a half.
As a result, a recent British intelligence report states that Ukraine has finally achieved parity in the number of tanks. Specifically, analysts noted that since the start of the full-scale war, Russia has lost half of its armored vehicles, while Ukraine, on the contrary, has been building up its armored strength thanks to Western supplies and captured equipment.
Russia has lost almost half of its army's overall combat capability. Last year it fired an estimated 10 million artillery shells, but at best it can only produce approximately 1 million new shells per year. It has lost as many as 2,500 tanks, and at best can produce just about 200 brand new tanks each year.
It is worth noting that no one expected Russian equipment to be destroyed at such a rate. It should also not be forgotten that the most advanced modern Russian units were ground down by the defense forces even before Western weapons deliveries began. Now, Ukraine has received hundreds of units of armored vehicles and artillery. We already have long-range missiles. Deliveries of cluster munitions are expected, and the decision to supply F-16 fighter jets is practically finalized. Taking all this into account, the pace of destruction of the Russian forces in Ukraine is increasing every day.